The crimson stain spreading across the photograph in her trembling hands wasn't blood, but tears that had fallen so steadily they'd begun to dissolve the faded sepia tones of faces she was desperate not to forget. Zander Fletcher had been riding through Parowan, Utah for 3 days straight, his horse exhausted and his own bones aching from the long journey from Wyoming, when he spotted her sitting on the wooden steps of the general store. The late afternoon sun of August 1878 cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street, and something about the way her shoulders shook with silent sobs made him pull his mare to a stop. He'd seen plenty of tears in his 26 years, had shed enough of his own after losing his parents to cholera 5 years back. But there was something about this particular woman's grief that reached right into his chest and squeezed. She didn't look up as his boots hit the ground, didn't seem to notice anything beyond the piece of paper in her hands. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around a face that would have been striking if not twisted with such raw pain. The simple cotton dress she wore was dusty from travel, and a worn leather bag sat beside her on the steps. "Madam," Zander approached slowly, removing his hat. "Are you all right?" Stupid question, he realized immediately. She clearly wasn't. Clara Zimmerman finally raised her eyes, green as spring grass and swimming with tears. She tried to speak, but only managed a choked sound before looking back down at the photograph. Zander could see it now, a family portrait. A stern-looking man in a military uniform, a gentle-faced woman in a high-collared dress, and between them, a much younger version of the woman before him. "I'm sorry," she finally managed, her voice hoarse. "I shouldn't be sitting here like this. I just needed a moment." Zander glanced around the street. A few townspeople were watching with curiosity, and he knew how quickly small towns could turn gossip into gospel. "How about I buy you a cup of coffee? There's a restaurant just down the way. Seems like maybe you could use someone to talk to if you're of a mind." She looked at him properly for the first time, taking in his weathered face, the honest brown eyes, the respectful distance he maintained. Something in his expression must have assured her because she nodded slowly and began to stand. Her legs wobbled, and Zander caught her elbow gently. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning, I think. I took the stage from Salt Lake City, arrived about an hour ago." Her voice was steadier now, though tears still clung to her lashes. "I was supposed to meet my uncle here, but the postmaster said he passed away 2 weeks ago." Heart gave out, apparently. Zander felt his own heart constrict with sympathy. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that. Were you coming to live with him?" She nodded as they walked slowly toward the restaurant, Zander leading his horse by the reins. "After my parents died 6 months ago back in Missouri. Scarlet fever. I've been staying with my aunt, but she remarried, and her new husband made it clear there wasn't room for me anymore. My uncle Samuel was my father's brother. He wrote and said I could make a home here with him." Her voice cracked. "I sold everything I owned to afford the journey. I have $17 to my name and nowhere to go." The weight of her situation settled over Zander like a lead blanket. He'd been in tight spots himself, knew what it felt like to be alone in the world, but at least he had his skills with horses and cattle, had been able to find work wherever he went. A woman alone, especially one clearly educated and gently raised, had far fewer options, and most of them weren't good. They settled into a corner table at the restaurant, and Zander ordered coffee and stew for both of them despite Clara's protests. "You need to eat," he said firmly but kindly. "Can't think straight on an empty stomach, and you've got some thinking to do." As they waited for the food, Clara carefully tucked the photograph back into her bag. "This was taken 4 years ago, just before my brother left for the East to attend university. He died there, pneumonia during his 2nd year. After that, my mother was never quite the same. Father tried to hold us together, but then the fever came. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. I'm the only one left, and I can't even remember their voices anymore. The photograph is fading, and soon I won't even have their faces to hold on to. Zander reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I lost my folks, too. My pa in a mining accident, my ma 6 months later. I think her heart just couldn't take being without him. I know that feeling, like you're watching them disappear a second time when the memories start to blur. Clara met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared loss. How did you bear it? I made new memories, he said simply. Not to replace them. You never replace the people you love, but to give yourself something to hold on to, reasons to keep waking up each morning. I started working with horses, really working with them, learning their ways. Traveled to new places, met good people, built a life they'd be proud of. The food arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. Clara seemed to gain strength with each bite, color returning to her cheeks. Zander found himself studying her when she wasn't looking, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the determined set of her jaw beneath the grief. I don't suppose Parowan has much need for a schoolteacher, Clara finally said, attempting a smile. That's what I was before, back home. I taught at the elementary school. Zander straightened. Actually, I heard just yesterday that the teacher here ran off to California with a mining engineer. The town council has been scrambling to find a replacement before school starts next month. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house was talking about it. Hope flickered across Clara's face before doubt crowded it out. But I don't know anyone here. I don't have references with me, and I can hardly afford a room while I wait to hear about a position that might not even materialize. Mrs. Henderson is good people, Zander said, his mind already working through possibilities. I've known her family for years. My cousin married her nephew. I could vouch for you, at least enough to buy you a few days to get things sorted, and if you need someone to speak to the town council on your behalf, I'd be happy to. Clara shook her head in bewilderment. Why would you do this for me? You don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. Zander considered this. I reckon that's true, but I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I see a woman who's had more than her share of hard luck but who's still trying to find her way forward. That takes courage. Besides, he added with a slight smile, something my ma used to say stuck with me. She said we're all just walking each other home, and if you can make someone's path a little easier, you should. Tears welled in Clara's eyes again, but these seemed different, touched with gratitude rather than pure grief. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Fletcher, Zander Fletcher, and no thanks necessary, madam, Clara Zimmerman, she replied, managing a genuine smile for the first time. And I insist on finding a way to repay your kindness, even if it takes me a while. They finished their meal while Clara told him more about her life in Missouri, her love of teaching, her father's work as a county clerk, her mother's beautiful garden. Zander shared stories of his years working on various ranches, his dream of someday owning his own spread, his travels through Wyoming and Colorado, and now down into Utah territory. As evening fell and lanterns were being lit along the main street, Zander walked Clara to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, a robust woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, listened to their story and immediately showed Clara to a small but clean room on the second floor. You pay when you can, Mrs. Henderson said firmly when Clara tried to offer some of her precious remaining money. Any friend of Zander's is welcome here, and Lord knows we need a decent teacher in this town. Half the children are running wild because the last one couldn't control a classroom to save her life. After getting Clara settled, Zander found himself reluctant to leave. He stood in the doorway of her room, hat in his hands, searching for words. "I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's all right. Take you to meet some of the town council members. And maybe, if you're willing, I could show you a bit of the area. There are some beautiful spots around here, places that might give you some peace." Clara stepped closer, and in the lamplight, Zander could see gold flecks in those green eyes. "I would like that very much. Zander, I meant what I said about repaying you. This kindness, on what might have been the worst day of my life, it means more than I can express." "Then let me give you new memories worth keeping," he heard himself say. "Happy ones to balance out the sorrow. This territory can be hard, but it's also got a beauty to it that can heal a wounded heart if you let it." Something shifted in the air between them, a spark of connection that went beyond shared grief and circumstance. Clara felt it too. He could see it in the way her breath caught, the way her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "I'll see you tomorrow," she whispered. Zander nodded and forced himself to walk away, though every step felt harder than the last. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the August heat already building despite the early hour. Zander arrived at the boarding house just as Clara was finishing breakfast. She wore a different dress, still simple but fresher, and had managed to pin her hair into a neat arrangement that made her look professional and capable. Their first stop was the mayor's office. Benjamin Turnbull was a portly man with impressive mutton chops and a shrewd gaze that softened when Zander explained Clara's situation. "A teacher, you say? And from Missouri? What subjects did you teach, Miss Zimmerman?" Clara sat up straighter. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and history for children ages 6 to 14. I also taught basic science and music when materials were available. I believe in firm but fair discipline and in making learning engaging for young minds." The mayor nodded approvingly. "We've got about 30 children who need schooling. The building is modest but sound. Previous teacher left behind most of the books and supplies for what they are worth. Position pays $30 a month plus housing in the small cabin behind the schoolhouse. Think you could handle it?" "Yes, sir," Clara said without hesitation. "I would be honored to serve this community." "Well then, consider yourself hired, pending a satisfactory first month. School starts September 3rd. That gives you time to get the classroom ready and meet some of the families." He stood and extended his hand, which Clara shook firmly. As they left the office, Clara's hands were shaking with relief and excitement. "I can't believe it. I have a position. I have somewhere to live. This morning I woke up wondering if I'd have to travel back east and try to find work in a factory, and now I'm going to teach again." Zander felt a rush of pleasure at her joy. "Told you things would work out. Now, how about I show you that schoolhouse, make sure it's fit for habitation?" The schoolhouse sat on the eastern edge of town, a simple white building with a bell tower and a small cabin nestled among cottonwood trees behind it. Inside, the single large room held rows of desks, a blackboard, and shelves of well-worn books. The cabin proved basic but clean, with a stove, a bed frame, a table, and 2 chairs. It needed airing out and a good scrubbing, but it was solid and private. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, running her hand along the table. "It's more than I dared hope for." "It'll need some fixing up," Zander observed, noting a loose floorboard and a window that didn't quite shut right. "If you'd allow me, I could come by this week and take care of the repairs. Won't take long." Clara turned to him, and he was struck again by her beauty, now lit with hope instead of dimmed by grief. "You've already done so much. I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering," he interrupted gently. "Besides, I'm between jobs right now. Was heading down to Arizona for ranch work, but that can wait a few weeks. Rather make sure you're properly settled first." The truth was, Zander was finding it harder and harder to imagine riding away from Parowan, or more specifically, riding away from Clara. He'd met plenty of women in his travels, some of them pretty, some of them kind, but none who'd stirred something in him the way she did. Maybe it was their shared understanding of loss, or maybe it was the courage she'd shown in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Or maybe it was simply the way her smile transformed her entire face, making him want to do whatever it took to see that smile again and again. Over the following days, Zander became a constant presence at the schoolhouse. He fixed the floorboards and windows, repaired the stove's flue, and built additional shelves for Clara's personal belongings. Clara threw herself into preparing for the school year, cleaning the classroom until it gleamed, organizing books and creating lesson plans. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and sharing meals in the evening. Zander found himself telling her things he'd never shared with anyone. His fear after his parents died that he'd never feel truly connected to another person again. His dreams of building something lasting instead of drifting from place to place, his love of the land and the animals that filled it. Clara opened up too, sharing memories of her family that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. She told him about her father's terrible singing voice and her mother's legendary apple pie, about her brother's plans to become a doctor, and how proud they'd all been. She spoke of her fear that she'd never have a family of her own, that she'd end up alone and forgotten. "You're not alone," Zander said one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun paint the distant mountains purple and gold. "Not anymore." Clara looked at him, her eyes serious. "Neither are you." The air between them thrummed with unspoken feelings, but both hesitated to voice them. Clara, still raw from her losses and uncertain of her place in this new life. Zander, aware that she needed time and stability, not pressure from a drifting cowboy with nothing but a horse and a bedroll to his name. The day before school was set to start, Mrs. Henderson hosted a small gathering at the boarding house to introduce Clara to some of the town's families. Zander watched from across the room as Clara charmed worried mothers and skeptical fathers alike, discussing educational philosophy and promising to give each child individual attention according to their needs. "You've got it bad," a voice beside him observed. Zander turned to find Robert Hayes, a rancher he'd done some work for the previous year. "I don't know what you mean," Zander replied, but he couldn't quite keep the smile off his face. Robert chuckled. "Son, you look at that woman like she hung the moon, not that I blame you. She's something special, that's clear to everyone here. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't have anything to offer her," Zander admitted. "I've got a little money saved, but not enough to start a ranch or even buy a proper house. She's just getting her feet under her. She doesn't need me complicating things." "Maybe not," Robert said thoughtfully, "but maybe she wants you to anyway. And as for the rest, well, I might have a solution to your employment problem if you're interested." Zander turned his full attention to the older man. "I'm listening." "My foreman is moving back east to care for his aging parents. I need someone who knows horses and cattle, someone reliable who can manage the hands and keep operations running smooth. It's hard work, but it pays well, and there's a house on the property that goes with the position. Nothing fancy but solid. It's yours if you want it." Zander felt his pulse quicken. "That's generous, Robert. Why me?" "Because I watched you work last year, and I know you're capable and honest. Because this town needs good men who'll put down roots instead of just blowing through. And because I'm not blind to what's developing between you and Miss Zimmerman there, and I'd like to see both of you happy. We don't have enough happy stories out here in the territory. Be nice to be part of making one." Before Zander could respond, Clara appeared at his elbow. "The children's choir is about to sing," I thought you might want to hear. Mrs. Henderson said you have a good ear for music." Zander found himself lost in her smile again. "I'd like that very much." As they moved to where the children were gathering, Robert caught Zander's eye and nodded. Zander nodded back, a decision forming in his heart. The next morning, Zander stood outside the schoolhouse as Clara greeted her students for the first time. Children of all ages arrived, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Clara handled each one with a perfect blend of warmth and authority that made Zander's chest swell with pride. He waited until the last child had entered before approaching the door. Clara saw him through the window and smiled, excusing herself for a moment to step outside. "Shouldn't you be in there teaching?" he teased. "I gave them a writing assignment to assess their current skills," she replied. "I have a few minutes. Is everything all right?" Zander took a deep breath. "I wanted to tell you that I've accepted a position as foreman at the Hayes Ranch. It's about 3 miles outside of town. Good work, steady pay, and a house that comes with it." He watched her face carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. Her eyes widened. "You're staying in Parowan, if that's all right with you." "I know we haven't known each other long, and I don't want to presume anything, but Clara, I can't imagine riding away from here. These past weeks, getting to know you, helping you build this new life, it's been the happiest I've been in years. I'm not asking for any promises or commitments. I just wanted you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for as long as you want me to be." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Zander Fletcher, you are the most unexpectedly wonderful thing that's ever happened to me. When I got off that stage, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. But you kept your promise. You've given me new memories, beautiful ones, and I want so many more." "So do I," Zander said softly. Then, emboldened by the look in her eyes, he asked, "May I court you, Clara, properly the way you deserve?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." He wanted to kiss her right there in front of the schoolhouse and God and everyone, but he settled for taking her hand and pressing it briefly to his lips. "Best get back to your students, teacher, but I'll be here at 3 o'clock to walk you home." "I'll be counting the minutes," Clara said, her face radiant. The autumn months that followed felt like a gift from heaven to both of them. Zander threw himself into his work at the Hayes Ranch, quickly proving himself invaluable and earning the respect of the other ranch hands. The house that came with the position was small but well built, and he spent his rare free time fixing it up, already imagining a future where it wouldn't be just him living there. Clara flourished as a teacher. The children adored her, and even the most troublesome students settled down under her patient but firm guidance. Parents praised her methods, and the school board expressed their satisfaction with her performance. She'd found not just employment but a true calling, a sense of purpose that helped heal the wounds of her grief. Every Sunday after church, Zander would drive Clara out into the surrounding countryside in a borrowed wagon. They explored slot canyons and meadows, watched eagles soar over red rock formations, and talked about everything under the sun. Sometimes they brought picnic lunches and spent hours sitting by streams, simply enjoying each other's company. One particularly beautiful October afternoon, they'd ridden up into the mountains where aspens blazed gold against an impossibly blue sky. They dismounted near a clearing with a view that stretched for miles, and Zander spread a blanket while Clara unpacked the food Mrs. Henderson had prepared. "I never imagined Utah would be this beautiful," Clara said, gazing at the panorama before them. "All those colors, the way the light hits the rocks, it's like being inside a painting." "My ma used to say that God took extra care with the West," Zander replied, sitting beside her. "Made it big and wild and beautiful to give folks something to aspire to." Clara turned to him, her expression tender. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. I wish I could have known her. I think she would have been proud of the man you've become." Zander felt a lump form in his throat. "I hope so. I think about them sometimes, my folks, wonder what they'd make of my life now. I think they'd like you." "I hope so," Clara said softly, "because I'm quite in love with their son." The words hung in the air between them, charged with significance. It was the first time either of them had used that word, though the feeling had been growing steadily for months. Zander cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing her cheekbones. "Clara Zimmerman, I have been in love with you since the day I saw you crying on those steps. Maybe even before I knew what it was. You're the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I thank God every day that I happened to ride through Parowan when I did." "As do I," Clara whispered, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved me, Zander. Not just from practical circumstances, but from drowning in grief. You reminded me that life could still be good, that I could still be happy." This time, Zander didn't hesitate. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and reverent, pouring all his love and devotion into that single perfect moment. Clara kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I want to marry you," Zander said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I know it's only been a few months, and maybe folks will say it's too soon, but Clara, I've never been more certain of anything. I want to build a life with you, a real home. I want to give you the family you thought you'd lost. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Will you marry me?" Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course yes. I would marry you tomorrow if it were possible." "It is possible," Zander said, grinning. "There's a preacher in town who owes me a favor. I helped him get his wagon unstuck from the mud last month, but maybe we should wait at least a few weeks, do it properly. Give folks time to prepare. Let Mrs. Henderson make one of her famous cakes." 3 weeks, Clara decided. "That gives me time to write to my aunt and let her know, and for us to prepare the house. I want to be married there, in the home where we'll start our life together, if that's all right." "That's more than all right," Zander assured her. "That's perfect." The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Henderson took charge of organizing the wedding with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. Clara's students made decorations, and several of the women in town helped her sew a simple but lovely dress in pale blue. Zander worked with Robert Hayes and the other ranch hands to make the house perfect, adding curtains Clara had sewn, building new furniture, and planting a garden that would bloom come spring. Clara received a letter from her aunt that was surprisingly warm. The woman apologized for how she'd handled things and sent a quilt that had belonged to Clara's mother, along with a silver brush and mirror set that had been passed down through the family. The gesture, though small, helped mend some of the hurt Clara had carried. On a brilliant November morning with the first hints of winter in the air, Clara and Zander were married in the yard of their home. The entire town seemed to turn out for the celebration. Clara wore her blue dress with a crown of dried flowers the children had made, and Zander wore his best suit, his eyes never leaving his bride's face as she walked toward him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. As they exchanged vows, Clara thought about the photograph she'd been crying over that day in August, the family she'd lost. The grief would never fully disappear, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet remembrance rather than a crushing weight. And now she had new people to love, a new family forming around her. "I promise to love you, to stand beside you through whatever comes," Zander said, his voice rough with emotion. "To build with you a life full of joy and meaning, to give you memories worth keeping every single day." Clara's voice was steady despite her tears. "I promise to be your partner, your companion, your love, to build a home and a future with you, to never forget where we came from, but to always look forward to where we're going together." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zander kissed Clara to the cheers and applause of their community. They spent the afternoon celebrating with neighbors who'd become friends, eating Mrs. Henderson's magnificent cake, and dancing to music provided by a local fiddler. As evening fell and the guests departed, Zander carried Clara over the threshold of their home, both of them laughing. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth and everything looked warm and welcoming. This was theirs, built through hard work and faith and love. "Happy, Mrs. Fletcher?" Zander asked, setting her down gently. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. Thank you, Zander, for every promise you've kept." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss and grief, the fear and uncertainty, the unexpected kindness of a stranger who'd become everything to her. She thought about the faded photograph still tucked safely in her belongings, her first family frozen in sepia tones. And she thought about the new memories being created, bright and vivid and full of love. "What are you thinking about?" Zander murmured, his arms tightening around her. "About how life can surprise you," Clara replied. "How you can lose everything and find something even more precious. About how grateful I am for every twist of fate that led me to that step in Parowan where you found me." "Best day of my life," Zander said, kissing her forehead. "Finding you." "Best day of mine, too," Clara agreed, "even though I didn't know it at the time." The winter that followed was harsh but joyful. Zander worked long hours at the ranch, but he always made it home for dinner with Clara. On weekends, they'd bundle up and explore the snow-covered landscape, or stay inside reading aloud to each other by the fire. Clara continued teaching, beloved by her students and respected by the community. She and Zander grew into their marriage, learning each other's habits and quirks, building the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. Spring brought new life to the land and new developments in their own lives. Clara discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled them both with joy tinged with nervousness. This would be their first child, the beginning of their own family. "What if I don't know how to be a good father?" Zander worried one evening, his hand resting protectively over Clara's still flat stomach. "You'll figure it out," Clara assured him. "The same way we've figured out everything else, together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued teaching through the spring, finally retiring when the school year ended in May. She spent the summer preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, while Zander built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving it with intricate designs of horses and flowers. On a hot July afternoon in 1879, Clara went into labor. Mrs. Henderson arrived to assist, along with the town's midwife, while Zander paced anxiously outside. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as the sun set, the first cries of their child filled the house. "It's a boy, Mrs. Henderson announced, opening the door with a broad smile. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing just fine." Zander rushed inside to find Clara propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle. When she pulled back the blanket to show him their son, Zander felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "Hello, little man," he whispered, running a gentle finger down the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "I'm your pa. What should we name him?" Clara asked, gazing up at her husband with love shining in her eyes. Zander considered. "Thomas, after your father, with my father's name, William, for a middle name." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas William Fletcher. It's perfect. They would both be so honored." Little Thomas proved to be a content baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Zander was a devoted father, always eager to hold his son, to rock him to sleep singing the old songs his own father had sung. Clara watched them together and felt her heart fill to bursting. The following year brought another pregnancy, and in March of 1881 they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah Grace. With dark hair like her mother and her father's brown eyes, Sarah was more spirited than her brother had been, keeping her parents on their toes. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Zander excelled in his position at the ranch, and Robert Hayes came to rely on him completely. The older man began talking about eventually selling Zander a stake in the operation, making him a true partner. Clara returned to teaching part-time once the children were old enough, hiring a young woman to help mind them during school hours. The house they'd started in grew, as their family did. Zander added 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He planted more trees and expanded the garden. Clara filled the space with warmth and love, creating a home that friends and neighbors loved to visit. The years passed, marked by milestones and memories. Thomas's first day of school, where he sat in the classroom his mother had once taught in full time. Sarah's 5th birthday party, attended by half the town. The Christmas when Zander brought home a puppy that the children immediately adored. The summer days spent fishing in nearby streams. The evenings gathered around the piano that had been Clara's gift to herself on their 5th anniversary, filling the house with music and laughter. Through it all, Zander and Clara's love deepened. They weathered challenges together. The drought year when money was tight, the winter when Sarah fell ill with pneumonia, and they spent terrifying nights watching over her until the fever broke, the death of Robert Hayes which hit Zander hard. But they also celebrated triumphs. Zander's purchase of a part ownership in the ranch, Clara's appointment to the Territorial Education Board, the respect and standing they'd earned in their community. Sometimes, Clara would take out the old photograph that had started everything, the one she'd been crying over that August day so long ago. The faces had faded even more over the years, barely visible now. But she found she didn't need the photograph as much anymore. She remembered her first family with love and gratitude, but they no longer haunted her with grief. Instead, she was surrounded by the family she and Zander had built together, and the memories they created every single day. One evening in the autumn of 1889, 11 years after they'd first met, Clara and Zander sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas, now 10, was doing homework at the kitchen table. Sarah, 8 years old and full of energy, was playing with the dog in the yard. The air was crisp with the promise of coming winter, and the mountains in the distance glowed purple in the fading light. "You ever think about that day?" Clara asked, leaning against Zander's shoulder. "When you found me on those steps?" Zander wrapped his arm around her. "All the time. Best day of my life finding you like that. I was so lost," Clara remembered, "so certain that I'd never be happy again. I couldn't imagine a future worth living. And now," Zander prompted. Clara smiled, watching Sarah chase the dog in circles, hearing Thomas's pencil scratching away at his studies, feeling the solid warmth of her husband beside her. "Now I can't imagine any other life. You kept your promise, Zander. You gave me memories worth keeping. So many of them that I hardly know where to put them all." "We're not done yet," Zander said, kissing the top of her head. "We've got years and years more to make, watching these two grow up, maybe grandchildren someday if we're blessed, growing old together in this house we built." "I can't wait," Clara said softly. "For all of it, every moment." As if sensing the tenderness of the moment, Sarah ran up onto the porch and climbed into her father's lap, while Thomas emerged from the house to lean against his mother's chair. They sat there together, the four of them, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, on a shelf in the bedroom, the old photograph rested beside newer ones. Pictures of a wedding day, of babies and growing children, of family gatherings and everyday moments. They told the story of a woman who'd lost everything and found it all again, and a man who'd been drifting until he found someone worth staying for. The photograph of Clara's first family was still precious, still honored, but it was no longer the only thing she had to hold on to. Now she had a home full of love, children to raise, a husband who cherished her, and a community where she belonged. She had years of memories already made and countless more still to come. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Zander found Clara standing at their bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. "Everything all right?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Clara leaned back against him. "More than all right. I was just thinking about how strange and wonderful life is, how you can be in your darkest moment and then everything can change, how one person's kindness can alter the entire course of your life." "It wasn't just kindness," Zander said quietly. "I took one look at you and something in me knew you were important, that you were going to change my life too." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Zander Fletcher, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. Thank you for seeing me that day, for stopping instead of riding past, for caring about a stranger's tears." "I love you too," Zander replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing but good intentions and a decent horse. Thank you for building this life with me." They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, two people who'd found home in each other's arms. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees. Inside, their children slept peacefully. And between them flowed a love that had been tested and proven true. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge, triumph and sorrow. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's love of learning. He eventually left for university, something that filled Clara with bittersweet pride, remembering her own brother's similar journey. But unlike her brother, Thomas returned home after graduation, eager to work alongside his father at the ranch. Sarah proved to be a natural teacher like her mother, and eventually took over the schoolhouse when Clara fully retired. She married a young veterinarian who'd moved to Parowan, and they built their home just down the road from Clara and Zander. The proximity delighted everyone, especially when Sarah and her husband presented Clara and Zander with their first grandchild, a red-haired girl named Clara after her grandmother. Zander eventually became full owner of the ranch after Robert's widow decided to sell her late husband's share. The operation thrived under his management, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality horses and cattle. He took on Thomas as a true partner, and together they expanded the business and its reputation. Clara continued her work with the Territorial Education Board, helping establish schools throughout Utah and advocating for better resources and teacher training. She published several articles on educational methods that gained attention even back east, making her something of a local celebrity. But she always said her greatest achievement was the family she'd built and the community she'd helped nurture in Parowan. They grew older gracefully, their love maturing like fine wine. Silver streaked through Clara's dark hair, and lines appeared around Zander's eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Their hands became weathered and worn, but they still fit together perfectly, fingers intertwining as easily as they had that first autumn when they'd courted. In the summer of 1898, 20 years after they'd first met, The whole family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration of Clara and Zander's anniversary. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. Thomas's wife was expecting their second child, and Sarah's 3 children ran wild through the yard just as she once had. As the party wound down and evening fell, Clara and Zander slipped away to their porch, their favorite refuge. They sat in the same chairs they'd sat in for 2 decades, looking out at the land they'd built their life on. 20 years, Clara marveled. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Any regrets? Zander asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Not a single one, Clara replied firmly. Well, maybe that I didn't meet you sooner, though I suppose we both needed to go through what we did to be ready for each other. Zander nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that photograph, the one you were crying over when I found you. Do you still have it? Of course. It's in our room with all the others. Why? I was just thinking about how terrified you were that day of forgetting, of losing the last traces of your family. And look at you now. You've created a legacy that will last generations. Your children and their children and their children after that. Your work with the schools, all those young minds you've shaped. The memories you've made don't just fill photo albums. They fill this entire town. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. You gave me all of that. You and your promise to make new memories worth keeping. We gave it to each other, Zander corrected gently. I was drifting before you, Clara. I had no roots, no real home. You gave me something to build for, a reason to stay in one place and put down roots. You made me want to be the best man I could be. Inside the house, they could hear their family, the chatter and laughter, the sounds of home. Their granddaughter Clara came running out onto the porch, all energy and joy at 6 years old. Grandma, Grandpa, we're going to sing songs. Come inside. Clara and Zander exchanged amused glances and allowed themselves to be pulled back into the warmth and chaos of their family gathering. They sang old songs and new ones, told stories, and made more memories to add to the collection. Late that night, after everyone had either left or settled into various bedrooms for the night, Clara lay in bed beside Zander. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sound of crickets. Tell me something, Clara said softly. What did you think that first day, really? What made you stop? Zander was quiet for a moment, remembering. I saw you crying, and I saw the photograph in your hands, and I recognized the look on your face. It was the same look I'd seen in the mirror after my folks died, that expression of being completely lost and alone. I stopped because I knew that feeling, and I knew what it was like to need someone to care, even if just for a moment. I never expected to fall in love with you. That was just a gift from God, I reckon. Clara snuggled closer to him. The best gift either of us ever received. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love that had endured. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, and Clara and Zander delighted in each one. They watched their children navigate the challenges of parenthood and partnership, offering wisdom when asked and support always. The ranch continued to prosper, and the community they'd helped build thrived. In 1905, Utah became a state, and the celebrations in Parowan lasted for days. Clara and Zander, now considered pillars of the community, were honored guests at every event. They'd lived through the roughest parts of territorial life and had helped build something stable and lasting. As they entered their 60s, their pace slowed, but their love never diminished. They spent more time sitting on that porch, watching sunsets and counting stars. They took walks through the property, always hand in hand, reminiscing about the early days and marveling at everything they'd created. One evening in early autumn of 1910, 32 years after they'd met, Clara suddenly said, "I want to tell you something I've never said before." Zander looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "That day you found me when I was crying over that photograph. Do you know what I'd been thinking just before you rode up?" Zander shook his head. Clara's voice was quiet but steady. "I was thinking that I couldn't go on, that the pain was too much and I had no reason to keep trying. I was in a very dark place, Zander, and then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I'd been saying. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a reason to keep going. You saved my life in more ways than one." Zander pulled her close, his own eyes wet. "And you saved mine." "Maybe we saved each other." "Maybe we did," Clara agreed. "And we built something beautiful from that salvation. A whole life, a whole family. New memories worth keeping, just like you promised. More than I could hold in 1,000 photographs." They sat there as the stars emerged, just as they had so many times before. The sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted from inside the house, where they'd come to visit for the weekend. The air smelled of autumn, of harvest and preparation for winter. "I'd do it all again," Zander said suddenly. "Every moment, even the hard parts. Every choice that led me to that street in Parowan on that August day in 1878. I'd make every single one of those choices again just to end up here with you." "As would I," Clara whispered. "Every loss, every tear, every moment of fear and uncertainty. All of it was worth it to get to this life with you." As the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the land they loved, Clara and Zander sat together in the peaceful contentment that comes from a life fully lived and a love deeply shared. They had faced the darkness and come through it together, building something bright and enduring from the ashes of loss. The photograph that had once represented all of Clara's grief and fear now sat among dozens of others, a testament not to endings but to continuity. The love she'd known in her first family hadn't disappeared. It had transformed and grown, expanding to encompass new people and new generations. The memories she'd been terrified of losing had been joined by countless new ones, each as precious as the last. In the house, their granddaughter little Clara found the old photograph on the shelf, its sepia tones nearly invisible now after decades. She brought it to her grandmother. "Grandma, who are these people? I can barely see them." Clara took the fragile photograph carefully. "That was my first family, sweetheart, my mother and father and brother. They died a long time ago before I came to Parowan. You must miss them," the child said with the simple empathy of youth. "I do," Clara admitted. "But I also have you and your sisters and your parents and Uncle Thomas and his family. I have your grandfather. I have a whole life full of people to love. Missing the ones who are gone doesn't stop me from loving the ones who are here." The little girl nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we make cookies tomorrow? Like we always do when we visit?" "Absolutely," Clara said, smiling. "That's exactly what we'll do." As her namesake granddaughter skipped away, Clara carefully returned the photograph to its place of honor. Beside it were pictures of wedding days and birthdays, of children being born and growing up, of celebrations and everyday moments that together formed the tapestry of a life. Each image told a story, and together they told the story of healing and hope, of love found and family built. That night, as Clara and Zander prepared for bed, they moved through their familiar routine with the comfortable ease of decades. They no longer needed words for everything. A glance or a touch conveyed whole conversations. They'd learned each other so thoroughly that they functioned as two parts of one whole. "I'm grateful," Clara said as they settled into bed. "For every day, every moment. For you, always for you. And I for you," Zander replied, pulling her close. My beautiful Clara, who taught me what it means to truly love someone." They fell asleep in their usual tangle of limbs, secure in the knowledge that they'd given each other exactly what they'd needed most: a reason to hope, a place to belong, and memories worth keeping for all the years they had together. The seasons continued to turn, and life went on in all its messy, beautiful complexity. There were more celebrations and more losses, more laughter and occasional tears. But through it all, Clara and Zander faced everything side by side, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. As they grew older still, they spent more time reflecting on their journey together. They never tired of telling their children and grandchildren the story of how they'd met, about the crying woman on the steps and the cowboy who'd stopped to help. It became family legend, a testament to the power of kindness and the possibility of new beginnings. "Always remember," Clara would tell her grandchildren, "that even in your darkest moments there's hope. Life can surprise you. It can take everything away and then give you more than you ever imagined possible. You just have to be brave enough to keep going, to accept help when it's offered, and to believe that better days are coming." And Zander would add, "And if you see someone hurting, stop and help. You never know how much that moment of kindness might mean, how it might change not just their life but yours too. The best things in my life came from a split-second decision to stop my horse and check on a stranger." Their wisdom, born from experience and tested by time, was passed down through the generations. The family that grew from that chance meeting in Parowan spread throughout Utah and beyond, but they always came home for holidays and celebrations, drawn by the love that had started it all. Clara and Zander lived to see the world change in ways they'd never imagined. They saw automobiles replace horses on some streets, though Zander never fully trusted the noisy machines. They saw electric lights and telephones, marveled at moving pictures and flying machines. Through it all, they held on to each other and the values that had guided them: honesty, hard work, kindness, and above all, love. On a warm spring day in 1920, as cherry blossoms drifted on the breeze and new leaves unfurled on the cottonwood trees, Clara and Zander sat on their porch for what would be one of the last times. They were both in their late 60s now, and age had finally caught up with their bodies if not their spirits. 42 years, Clara said, her voice still strong despite the white hair and weathered face. 42 years since you found me crying over that photograph." "Best 42 years of my life," Zander replied, his hand finding hers automatically. "Wouldn't change a thing. Not even the hard parts, not even those. They made us who we are. They made us appreciate the good times all the more." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The house was full that weekend. 3 generations gathered for a family reunion. The sounds of cooking and conversation drifted from inside, the soundtrack of a family that loved being together. "We did good, didn't we?" Clara asked softly. "We did better than good," Zander assured her. "We built something that will last long after we're gone. Look at all of them, all these people who exist because we found each other. That's legacy, Clara. That's immortality." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, their children and grandchildren emerged from the house to join them. They gathered around, sitting on the porch steps and the lawn, drawn by some unspoken understanding that this moment mattered. Thomas proposed a toast with glasses of lemonade, since neither Clara nor Zander drank alcohol. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who showed us what real love looks like, who taught us the value of hard work and honest living, who built a home and a family from nothing but faith and determination. Thank you for everything you've given us." "To Grandma and Grandpa," the others echoed, raising their glasses. Clara's eyes filled with tears and Zander squeezed her hand. They looked around at all these faces, these lives they'd touched and shaped. It was overwhelming and humbling and absolutely perfect. Later, as the stars emerged and the air grew cool, Clara asked Zander to dance with her. Someone started playing music, and despite their age and creaking joints, they swayed together in the moonlight while their family watched. It was the same gentle, devoted way they danced at their wedding 42 years before, a physical manifestation of a love that had never wavered. When the song ended, Clara looked up at her husband. "Thank you," she whispered, "for stopping that day, for seeing me, for keeping your promise, for giving me memories worth keeping." "Thank you for letting me," Zander replied, "for taking a chance on me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." They kissed, gentle and sweet, and their family erupted in applause and cheers. Clara laughed through her tears, and Zander held her close, grateful beyond words for every moment they'd shared. As the party wound down and people began retiring to bed, Clara and Zander took one last walk around their property. They moved slowly, supporting each other, looking at everything they'd built over the decades. The house they'd expanded and improved, the gardens Clara had tended, the barns and corrals where Zander had worked, the trees they'd planted that now towered overhead. "I'm tired," Clara admitted as they finally made their way back to the house. "But it's a good tired, the tiredness of a life well lived." "I know what you mean," Zander agreed. "I'm ready to rest when the time comes. But not yet. I'm not done making memories with you." They climbed into bed that night surrounded by photographs on every wall and surface, images of their life together, their family, their friends, their adventures. The old photograph of Clara's first family was there too, still honored, still important, but just one piece of a much larger story. Clara fell asleep with Zander's arms around her, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished. The grief that had nearly destroyed her all those years ago was now just a distant memory, healed by time and love and the life she'd built. In the following years, they continued to live fully despite their advancing age. They watched Thomas expand the ranch and Sarah become a grandmother herself. They saw their great-grandchildren start school and take their first steps and say their first words. They celebrated more anniversaries and birthdays, always surrounded by the family that meant everything to them. Zander passed away peacefully in his sleep on a winter night in 1923, 3 months short of his 71st birthday. He'd spent the evening with Clara, talking and laughing, holding hands, and reminiscing about their life together. When she woke the next morning to find him gone, Clara's heart broke even as she recognized the mercy in such a gentle passing. At his funeral, Clara spoke about their love story, about the cowboy who'd stopped to help a crying stranger and ended up giving her a life beyond her wildest dreams. She talked about promises kept and memories made, about building something beautiful from loss and pain. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Clara lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged with the world. She spent her time writing down family stories, wanting to preserve the history they'd made. She recorded recipes and advice, family trees and important dates. She wanted to leave behind everything she could for the generations to come. On a beautiful summer evening in 1928, 50 years after that fateful day in Parowan, Clara sat on the porch one last time. Sarah was with her and several grandchildren, and they talked about Zander and the early days and everything that had come after. "Tell us again, Grandma," young Clara asked. She was 16 now, on the cusp of adulthood. "About the day you met Grandpa," So Clara told the story one more time, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She told them about the grief and fear, about thinking her life was over. She told them about a kind stranger who'd seen her pain and stopped to help. She told them about promises and new beginnings, about love that transformed everything. "He saved me," Clara said simply. "And I like to think I saved him too. We saved each other, and from that salvation came all of you. Never forget that even in your darkest moments, there's hope. There's always hope for new memories worth keeping." That night, Clara passed away in her sleep, just as Zander had. The family mourned but also celebrated, knowing she'd lived a full and rich life and was now reunited with the man she'd loved for half a century. They buried her beside Zander on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they'd both loved. The headstone reads simply, "Clara and Zander Fletcher, they kept their promises." The house they'd built became a gathering place for generations of Fletchers. The photographs that lined its walls told the story of a family built on love and faith and determination. And the tale of how it all began became the story passed down through the years, a reminder that kindness matters, that love heals, and that it's never too late for new beginnings. Years later, descendants would visit that hillside grave and thank the couple buried there for the legacy they'd left. Children who'd never met Clara and Zander would grow up knowing their story, inspired by the example of two people who'd found each other in their darkest moments and built something luminous from the ashes of grief. The faded photograph that had started it all was carefully preserved, passed down through the family as a precious heirloom. It served as a reminder not of loss, but of continuity and resilience. It was proof that while people die and memories fade, love endures and families grow and life continues in all its messy, beautiful complexity. In Parowan, the schoolhouse where Clara had taught still stood, now a museum dedicated to the town's educational history. Clara's contributions were prominently featured, inspiring new generations of teachers. The Fletcher Ranch thrived under the management of Thomas's descendants, still known throughout Utah for quality and integrity, values instilled by its founders. But perhaps the greatest legacy Clara and Zander left was simply the example of their love. In a harsh and often unforgiving time and place, they'd shown that kindness could change lives, that grief could be healed, and that two broken people could come together to create something whole and beautiful. They'd proven that promises kept and memories made could sustain a lifetime and beyond. And so the story ends where it began, with tears and a photograph. But instead of an ending, those tears had marked a beginning. Instead of representing loss, that photograph became part of a much larger collection, documenting not just one family but generations. Clara had been afraid of forgetting, of losing the last traces of the people she'd loved. Instead, she'd created a legacy that ensured no one would ever forget her family or the life she and Zander built together. The cowboy had found her weeping and had promised to give her new memories worth keeping. It was a promise he kept every day for 45 years, and in keeping it, he'd given her not just memories but a whole life, a whole world, full of love and purpose and meaning. And she'd given him the same in return. Two souls who'd recognized each other in that moment on the steps and had chosen to walk forward together, creating something beautiful with every step.